why do I want to go through that whole learning cycle of
Hmm.
what, what the middle class rules are? Until they can understand why those things are important, they never will succeed. And that's, again, another case for why we deal only with folks who have some spiritual footing, because without that internal motivator, knowing that there's a God who cares about us, who loves us, who has a incredible plan for our life, what motivation is there to change?
Right. It gives you purpose.
Yeah, yeah. And again, so you can understand why I cringe when people just say, well, all they need is a job, or all
Yeah.
they need to do is show up.
They're missing the
Well,
point.
yeah, that you don't understand where these folks are coming from. And frankly, this is the exact same issues I see in the rural areas, I see in the inner city. Is white, black, green, doesn't matter. It's a bigger issue of where you came from. If you came from generational poverty, you got a long road to hoe.
That's true. And I understand that life is not fair. And anybody who thinks that if you're a black individual versus a white individual, that you're not going to have a tougher time getting a job, then you're living with your head in a hole in the ground, because that's just a fact. A black person has a tougher time getting a job in this country than a white person, because while racism is not nearly as bad as it has been, it's getting better all the time. It's still there. It's still there. And that's not fair. But life isn't fair. And an example I like to give is how hard you need to apply for a job. And let's say if you're a white person and you're applying for job A, you may have to put in 10 resumes. If you're a black person and applying for job A, you may have to put in 15 resumes.
Well, there's another.
But my
there's
answer
another
is
fact.
you put in 15.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, there's another factor there. It's one of relationships. When beyond our entry level jobs, and when we were looking for, higher paying, higher level jobs, chances are that most people find those jobs through relationships. Blindly sending out resumes really gets you nowhere.
That's true.
You most of us had an uncle, a brother, a cousin, a friend of a friend, a father, or somebody else who knew us, who knew of our character, and was able to say to someone else, this is a person worth giving a chance. And again, that's another layer of challenge for someone coming from generational poverty, black or white, is they have no relationships that tie them to the employment community. And, so that adds that much more of a challenge.
Yeah,
And so
that's so true.
That's one of the things that we do in our work is, we have folks from the urban area, folks from the suburban area, and we have a large network. And we have, because of my business background, I'm tied to a lot of business owners, and I go to them and say, hey, I got a proposition for you. Here's a way that we can help you solve your desire to be more inclusive of folks coming from the inner city. We have a connection here. We're helping develop their character. We're giving them a plan. We're going to mentor them. We're going to walk alongside them, even after they take a job with you. And here's how we can help train your leaders in your business to better understand people coming from that culture, so when they see that fight or flight thing, they know how to manage it. So we're helping develop those relationships for folks to succeed.
You're doing fantastic work. How did you get into this? I mean, you were a guy who worked in manufacturing, and then how did you segue into the social entrepreneur deal?
Back in 1999, I had sold my first business, and I was in a business group called Young Presidents Organization, and I got this fax inviting my family to go to Mexico to participate in building a home for ultra poor folks down in Tijuana, who were basically living under a tarp and pallets. And I took my kids, who were 6 and 8 at the time, and my wife, and we spent a long weekend. And we built what was, would be a storage shed by our standards. It was 16 by 20, but it had 3 windows, a lockable door, a solid roof, and walls. And it was a palace to these folks. You know, the kids argued over who got to sweep the concrete floor because they never lived on a concrete floor before. And one of the moms said, now when it rains, my children won't get wet.
Wow.
It gave these people a secure place to live and to keep their things and to keep the kids healthy so they could stay in school, so to increase their chances of, success in that way. But all that taught us was a little bit of our energy. I mean, it was a long weekend, and, a few dollars we helped spend to buy the building materials for, along with a large group of folks, to see how that could transform. I began asking myself, how do you multiply this effort? And so that started a journey for me on several different continents of working with different groups, from healthcare to housing to clean water and so forth. And then I tripped over an organization called Opportunity International that works with the ultra poor and provides microloans to them of like $50. And, all these folks living on those continents have to get $1 or $2 in their hand every day just to eat. And so they have some kind of little micro business selling tomatoes in the market, or, making simple clothes or whatever, but they don't have the capital to hire other people to, get a decent sewing machine, whatever. So they get access to a loan, and within 6 months, they're earning 7 times what they were before that.
Wow.
And more importantly, they do it by putting people together in groups of folks who have, common situation. And the loans they receive are given as a group loan of 7 or 8 people who have come together, who trust each other, and they countersign for each other's loans. So if you and me and 5 other people are in a group and I don't pay, you have to pay for me.
Right.
So there's an immense peer pressure to help each other succeed, and you become like your own little mentor group. And it's extremely successful with like a 99% success rate. So I learned in that process that, and then once you empowered these folks, they figured out how to get clean water. They figured out they could then afford medical care. They can over time then add things to their little hovel to turn into a decent house. They solved their own problem, and we weren't even present when they did it. And so I began to ask, well, why couldn't this work in our own country? And that's kind of what led me to identify what the elements of success would be for doing this work in our country.
Amazing. Drew Smith, thank you very much. I've appreciated your time today. If somebody wanted to get in contact with you to learn more about your organization, your mission, or somebody needed help, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Drew Smith, Derry W. Smith, 1955 at Gmail.
One more time, please.
Drew Smith, that's Derry W. Smith, 1955 at Gmail. They can also Google Refuge and Restoration nonprofit. That's the organization, Refuge and Restoration. And it'll pop up both a church called Refuge and Restoration, and it will pop up the nonprofit, which I'm a part of. And they can see a vision of what the long-term plan is up in North City. They're buying a huge abandoned Schnucks Plaza up there, and they're going to have our employment center. They're going to have a health center, a training center that includes training in the geospatial area, in coding, in the trades and that sort of thing, as well as the church will be located there, and a daycare and all kinds of things that are necessary services for people living in generational poverty up there.
Very good. I appreciate your time. Drew Smith, thank you very much. You're doing fantastic work. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Great, James.
Okay.
Good talking to you.
You bet. Thank you. Thank you. And you too, sir. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye. Well, that's it. We're done. Thank you, Drew, for being on the podcast and showing us a good way to do things. That's it. We're done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Send me your email address, and then we will go ahead and after you send me the email address, I will send you a link to the podcast, and you can go ahead and download it and listen to it at your leisure. I also love to get emails from the listeners, and also You can pick up the podcast on any place you get podcasts. That's it. We're done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.